A few months ago, Retevis released the HA1G, a fantastic performing GMRS radio that was IP67 rated, built like a tank, and had an excellent battery. Now, they followed it up with the HA1UV, which is all of the same stuff, just built for amateur radio. Now, the question is, if you have one of these, can you turn it in to one of these, thereby maybe saving yourself some money? The answer is yes, but it can get complicated. Now, the question of should you do that is even more complicated, but we're going to go over all of that coming right up. Now, I just want to be clear that this is not going to be a review video of these radios. There are plenty of review videos out there, especially for the HA1UV because it just came out. Tech Minds did one, Smoking Ape did one, KS6DAY did one, and definitely check out one of their channels if you're just looking for a review. What we're interested in is what is the HA1G capable of? And that's what we're going to find out. But that being said, I will go over some of the standout features of these radios. They both feature 2800 milliamp hour batteries that are chargeable via USB-C on the back, which means they can charge standing up. I love that. They can both receive FM broadcast and weather radio. The HA1G obviously transmits and receives GMRS frequencies, but it can also receive ham frequencies, and you don't have to do anything to this to make that happen. So if that's all you're looking for, you don't need to do anything. This, the HA1UV, can transmit and receive on the ham bands, the 2 meter and 70 centimeter bands. It can also receive GMRS without having to do anything. If you wanted to transmit on GMRS, that is possible. I'm not saying you should do it, I'm just saying you could do it, and we'll go over that too. So other than that, they both feature Motorola style interfaces for their speaker mic connection, and be very careful when you are buying a speaker mic because these Motorola style connections are not universal. Even amongst Motorola radios, they change a little bit. Be sure you're getting one that will fit. If you want to avoid that, there is a Kenwood adapter that I will show later in the video, and I'll also leave a link in the description that allows you to plug in any Kenwood style speaker mic or programming cable if you were to happen to lose the cable that these both come with. I don't think that would happen. You'd have an extra one if you have both, but whatever. If you need an extra programming cable, it does work. They both have color screens. They're both IP67 rated, which means they can be submersed for a long period of time before any kind of damage would happen, and they're just both built really well. So that being said, let's find out what the HA1G is actually capable of. Now, the easiest method to unlock the HA1G is just to hold the PTT and number 8 while you power the radio on. Hold them down, and you completely unlock the radio. Want to undo it? Just hold down PTT again and the number 8, and you will see that we are back into GMRS mode. Now, this does not allow you to use the HA1UV software. If you want to do that, we have to swap out firmware, and I'll show you that in just a minute, but I did mention a Kenwood adapter. Let me show you that. Now, just so you know, both the HA1G and HA1UV come with a programming cable, but I found this Kenwood adapter, which is really, really convenient. You take off the side cover as you would for anything else. I try not to screw these in too tight because they're a real pain. And the Kenwood adapter, which I'll get over here, it's got the notch at the top and the screw at the bottom, just like if it were a speaker mic plug. And you secure it to the radio. There's a notch in the top, and you screw it down. Make sure you screw this down tight. You don't want it flopping around and not making contact. And once you put that in, that's it. It sticks out from the side a little, but it does not stick out the back, so the radio will lay flat, which is nice. It has a rubber plug on the back, you can see here, to cover up the holes, kind of weatherproof it a little bit, which is cool. And then you just take your favorite Kenwood style speaker mic or programming cable. I have a programming cable here. Plug it in, and that's all there is to it. Now, this programming cable, it's just a GM30 programming cable from Radioddity. It's nothing special, but I decided to use it here. So you put that in. It's still flush with the back of the radio, which is nice. And all you have to do is take this cable, plug it into your computer, fire up a CPS, and you're in good shape. Speaking of which, let's go to my computer. Okay, so here we are on the computer, and the first thing you're going to want to do is download the necessary files that you'll need to do this process of turning an HA1G into an HA1UV. So the first thing you'll need is the Retevis CPS. The latest version, I believe, is version 1.0, and I have the 64-bit version. You're also going to want to download the HA1UV firmware update. Now, you don't use everything in this folder, if I remember correctly. Oh, this is the one that only has the bin. Okay, so you'll need this file, the binary file. That's it. Don't worry about the changelog. It's not important. And you will also need to go to the Allen's website, because the last time I checked the Retevis website, they didn't have this. You're going to go to the Allen's website and download the HA1G firmware. Well, why? Well, just in case you want to roll it back, you're going to want to have this file right here on hand, the January 9th of 2025 version of the HA1G firmware. We are not going to use the HA1G update tool. It is pointless in this application. We don't need it. So grab those two firmware files, this one and then the one for the HA1UV, and extract them into a folder that you can find easily. I put them into this folder on my desktop called Firmware Files. Once you have those, fire up the CPS. You might get a warning that it's unsigned, and that's just because the author of the software didn't want to pay Microsoft for a license, and so the software is unsigned. I don't worry about it. So we are not going to connect here. So don't press connect. I know it might be, logical to do that, but that's not what we're going to do. So take your HA1G, pardon me, and connect it to your computer. Now, once you have it connected, don't turn it on right away. Just leave it connected, because what we're going to do is we're going to get set up for the firmware update before we do anything with the radio. So go to Operation, Firmware. You need to choose which port your USB cable is connected to, whether you're using a Kenwood one with the adapter like I showed you, or you're using the one that came with the radio. You need to know which port you're going to use. Now on this computer, I always get two. I'm not exactly sure why, but I always get two. Now, I know for this particular application, it's going to be COM3. Yours will most likely be different. The one that I use on my laptop upstairs, that's actually COM11. So, COM3. And for model, you do want to select HA1UV. Okay, so then this screen pops up and it tells us, please turn off the device and then press and hold both the PTT and the PF1 buttons at the same time. Turn on the radio to enter the mode for flashing firmware. So in order to put the radio into firmware update mode, you need to hold the PTT button down and the PF1 button, which is right underneath it, and then turn the radio on. Now, once you turn it on, the LED should go green for a minute and then turn red, and the screen will not be on. That's how you know you're in firmware update mode. So once you've got that set, all you need to do is select the HA1UV firmware file, which is this one, HA1UV, and then click Open. And this is where we're going to upload the firmware to the radio. So just go ahead and click download. Now this takes 1.5 to 2 minutes. I'm going to cut the time so that we're not sitting here just watching a status bar go across the screen. Okay, and our radio is done updating. Now, if it worked, your radio should have turned itself back on, the screen should be on, but the LED at the top is going to be red, and we are not done yet, so don't turn your radio off or disconnect it. This step is critical, and I found this out. Press Menu, press the arrow up once, and that will take you to factory reset. Go ahead and do a factory reset by pressing Menu, and then pressing it again 3 times to confirm that, yes, I do actually want to factory reset my radio. It will take a minute, and when it reboots, the green light should come on for a second and then go off, and your screen should be on. And the firmware update process is complete. So what we can do is close our firmware update dialog here, And we can try to connect to this as an HA1UV. So again, we'll go port 3 for me, HA1UV, and I'm going to press OK. If this connects, we've been successful. And as you can see, it's working. If you get a status bar that's going from 1 to 100, it's working. And there you go, read successfully. So we have successfully converted our HA1G into an HA1UV. Now, what if you wanted to roll back? What if you wanted to go back to an HA1G firmware on your HA1G? And what if you wanted to take your HA1UV and put the HA1G firmware on it? Well, why would you want to do that? Because some people prefer the other CPS that comes with the HA1G. I do not. I much prefer this CPS. I find it much easier to use than the one that came with the HA1G, but there are those out there that prefer the HA1G CPS. That's fine. You can load the HA1G firmware onto the HA1UV like we just did here. And in fact, we're going to roll back the HA1G just so you can see how it's done. But you can do that on the HA1UV and then unlock it with the PTT and 8 button so that you can actually transmit on the ham frequencies for 70 centimeters and 2 meters. And you have a ham radio that you can manage with the HA1G CPS. Now, not everybody's going to want to do that, but if you do, it's an option. So now that we have updated our radio to an HA1UV, again, let's say we want to roll it back. I don't really want to keep it this way. And in fact, I decided I didn't want to keep mine this way, but we'll get into that later in the video. So it's basically the same operation. We go back to the firmware tab, but this time we're going to select the HA1G firmware. And again, you do it all from here. You don't use the HA1G update tool. That is not used in this process at all. So again, turn off your radio and then hold the PTT and the PF1 button while you turn it on. And again, the LED will go green for a second, the screen will be off, and then the LED will go red. And that means you are in firmware update mode. And again, we're just going to click download and wait about 2 minutes. Okay, and our radio is done updating its firmware. Now again, it is critical that you do a factory reset without disconnecting the radio, without turning it off. Right now, just go directly to the radio, press menu, press the arrow key up once, and press factory reset, and then 3 times to confirm. If you don't do this, the radio does not change its identity. I don't know why. The firmware will upload, everything will seem to be fine, but when you try to read it with the HA1G CPS, it does not recognize it. And vice versa, if you load HA1G firmware onto the HA1UV, it doesn't change its identity. So you have to do that factory reset in order for the radio to change its identity. Now we confirm that we have rolled it back to an HA1G by doing the following. We simply try to connect. So we're going to try to read the same radio that we have connected here. And let's see what happens. Now on mine, the screen says model mismatch. And eventually the software is going to time out and say that it wasn't able to connect. And that's because we have successfully rolled our HA1G back to its stock firmware, or at least the most recent firmware available for it. So that's all there is to it. And again, what we just did, rolling back to the HA1G firmware, the process would be exactly the same if you wanted to put the HA1G firmware on the HA1UV and then unlock it for ham use. You would load the firmware like we just did, but then you would have to do the unlock where you hold the PTT and the number 8 while you turn it on, or you won't be able to broadcast on the ham bands. You'll only be broadcasting on GMRS, which is not really smiled upon by the FCC. We'll just leave it at that. That's up to you. I'm not telling you what to do, whether you should or shouldn't, but I am going to say operate responsibly. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple other things here about these two radios and their similarities and differences, and why you may or may not want to put HA1UV firmware on your HA1G. Let's take a quick look at these two over at the bench. Okay, so we're over on the test bench, and the first thing we're going to do is check the power output of each one of these radios. On the left is the HA1G, which has been unlocked to transmit on ham frequencies using the PTT and number 8 method. On the right is the HA1UV, which is built for use on the ham band, so you don't have to do anything to it. So let's get my power meter connected here, turn the radio on, make sure we're on 146.52. That's high power, and let's see what kind of readings we get. .2 on 146.52, so 5.2 in the VHF. We'll switch to 446.52 on high power. And we get 5.4 for the UHF band. 5.3, dropped a little bit. Now it's wavering. Okay, so that is the power output of the HA1G. We're certainly hitting 5 watts. Surprising. A radio advertised as 5 watts, it's actually putting out 5 watts. Now we're going to look at the HA1UV and see what kind of power output we get there. Again, 146.52 on high power. And we get 5.2, 5.1, definitely hitting 5 watts. All right, let's go to the UHF 446.52, wavering between 4.9 and 5.0. So we're getting 5 watts there as well. So both radios are able to put out 5 watts consistently. The HA1G has a little bit more put out than the HA1UV, but that is not going to make a difference in your transmissions at all. I mean, you have to double the output to make a very small difference in clarity on the other end. So, you know, a tenth of a watt is not going to make any bit of difference at all. I do want to point out something that I noticed while I was doing this test just on my own. If you look at the antenna stems, the HA1G, this is all the way down. I have my adapter all the way down. The stem is longer. The one on the HA1UV is shorter, and my adapter fits on it like it should. This, much like the Radioddity GM30, has a longer stem, and if you take these off, I'll show you quickly what they look like. You can physically see that the stem on the HA1G is longer. So that's something to keep in mind. If you want to put a 70 centimeter, 2 meter antenna on here, it might float a little bit. Now, the way I fix that is I just put some rubber washers down there first, and then put the antenna on after those, and nobody is any the wiser, and it looks fine. And it also adds a little bit of weatherproofing in that area for you if you feel like you need it. But it does make it aesthetically more pleasing. It's not necessary. You could just leave the adapters on there like I had them. So the next thing we're going to do is check these on a Tiny SA Ultra and see how clean their transmissions are and see if there's any difference there. So let me put these back on. I will set these down, and I'll be back in a minute with the Tiny SA Ultra, and we'll get started with that. Okay, so I got my Tiny SA ready, and we're going to measure each radio to see if it's putting out spurious emissions. And if it is, do they fall within the FCC regulations for transmitting on the ham bands or not? So let's start out with the HA1G. We'll test that one first. I'll just put the HA1UV to the side. Here is my Tiny SA. And we'll turn this on. Okay. So this is on 146.52, and we'll take a look here. Now the blue line represents negative 16.02 dB. Any spurs need to be 40 below the fundamental, you see that number 1, but they also need to be below that line. And as you can see, it is very, very close, but we do have a spur that's above that threshold. So This radio, at least mine, does not pass for ham use. Yours might. Yours might. I am not going to say that they're all like this, but this particular radio does not pass. My second spur there, my second harmonic, is just a little too high. There are some other harmonics there, but they're all below that negative 16.02. So for me, this would not be okay to use for ham bands. So let's take a look at the HA1UV. See if that's any different. Okay, we're at 146.52 on high power, and let's take a look at that one. Okay, we're giving it time to level off. And look at that. It is squeaky clean. That's really great to see. Really is. I mean, this is not that hard to do, to get a clean transmission. So there you go. And you just heard my HA1G going off on the side because it was tuned to receive 146.52. In any case, the HA1UV is extremely clean. The HA1G, it's pretty clean. It's definitely not the worst that I've ever seen, not by a long shot. But if we're going by the rule, it's not permissible to use for the ham bands according to the FCC. You have to make those choices for yourself. That spur was extremely low on mine. I mean, it was just over the threshold. Yours might be different. Get yourself a tiny SA and test it and see, because maybe you can use yours for ham. I'm not comfortable doing it, but hey, you got to make that call for yourself. One thing I will say though, the HA1UV being so clean, that means that all of your power, all of that 5 watts that it's generating, is going out on the fundamental. The HA1G, though its spurs were low, you are spreading that power out over your fundamental and those 3 or 4 other spurs that we saw. So it's kind of like having a garden hose and this is on shower setting while this is on jet. You know, all of that energy is going into one frequency rather than the fundamental frequency and a few others. So in reality, this is a bit more efficient as well. So those are the differences that I found. The antenna stems, and that the HA1UV is squeaky clean, which matches up with what everything else I've seen on YouTube. The HA1G, it's pretty clean, but not so much. But that's in VHF. Now, when you're using GMRS, you're actually in the UHF band, and the radios are not judged the same way. You don't even have to check for spurs in the UHF band. So this is great for ham use. Yours might be okay for ham use, but mine is not. All right? So with that being said, let's wrap things up. So yes, you can convert an HA1G into an HA1UV using one of 2 methods. Now, the firmware method has the benefit of allowing you to use the HA1UV software, which is a bit more modern and nicer than the HA1G software. However, if you want to roll this back to stock, it requires a bit more effort. The keypad option, you can roll back easily without really having to do anything, but you don't get to use the software that comes with the HA1UV. Also, the HA1G was not as clean on transmit as the HA1UV. This was extremely clean, squeaky clean. This was not. And I'm almost certain there is more filtering in the HA1UV than the HA1G, which could explain the $25 or so price difference between the 2 radios. So I hope that you found this video informative and entertaining, and if you did, I really would appreciate a thumbs up or even a subscription if you're so inclined. Thanks for dropping by, and remember, when it comes to tech, I've got you covered. So if you already had one of these, could you turn it in? Oh my gosh, somebody flushed the toilet. Hang on.